Oh, what an intro. I'm going to do a visual description to start with. So I am a white woman with short brown hair in a center parting. I'm wearing a blue suit, white t-shirt, and some very ill-advised high yellow heels. We're going to start with a little bit of an interactive question. So hands up if you are able, if you have heard of the word ableism. Fair amount of you. And then if you are able to, keep it up if you know what it means. Again, not very many people. And finally, and it's not your fault, by the way, and finally, if you're able, keep your hand up if you know that you have been on the receiving end of ableism. 100% of you should have your hands in the air. Ableism is built into our society. And the definition of ableism is the discrimination and prejudice against disabled people in favor of non-disabled people. Now, how ableism expresses itself in a way that you can understand how it has impacted you. Ableism is the get to work constantly, the productivity sort of hustle 24-hour culture that we have grown up in. Ableism makes you go back to work after you've had a child way sooner than you might be ready to. Ableism is breaking a leg and possibly still being asked to commute to work. It does impact every single one of us. 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability, or 1 in 4 in the US. It's 15 to 22% of the global population. It's not a small group, over 1 billion of us, and growing. And the reason that we don't hear about disability is because we still hide and are afraid of it, and we still segregate disabled people, including children. And then further to that, and this 1 in 5, is that it can happen to anybody at any time. It is the world's largest marginalized group and the only group that anybody at any time could join. And to understand why disability and how representation is more important now than ever, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of ableism and how it has been built into our culture. Unfortunately, it is super dark, so there's no nice way of saying it. So ableism at its absolute worst is eugenics. And eugenics is the eradication of less desirable, basically disabled people. And it was Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, who founded the British Eugenics Society in the 1880s. And that idea took hold. Now, there were some very few positives to that, such as how we grow crops better and how we sort of grow how we have animals that we breed for eating and dairy and so on, to get the best out of them. Obviously, the darker side is the eradication of disabled people and genocide, essentially. So, somebody that took that up and really ran with it, unfortunately, was Germany. In the late 1930s, Action 4, which actually occurred 2 years before the Holocaust, was the murder of 300,000 disabled people. The SS actually wore white coats to go into the homes of people where they knew disabled people were, to remove that person, to kill them. It's not a great look for anybody, obviously, and it's something that we have all said never again to, the Holocaust and so on. Unfortunately, it's still happening. We say never again, but right now there is a country that is in all of our hearts, I'm sure, and there are children with cancer in bunkers unable to leave. There are people around the world in war-torn countries who cannot flee because so few governments have an evacuation plan for disabled people. Even the bunkers in Ukraine currently are not accessible. So there are people literally being left to die, and leaving people to die is the same as voluntarily killing them. So we have to understand how bad things have been to how good they could be, but it's been affecting a lot of people, and it continues to this day. And further to that, in the UK, at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a widespread amount of do not resuscitate orders that were given to people with learning disabilities, cancer patients, not because they had COVID symptoms, but effectively being told, we won't save you. That's right now, and that's still happening. Even the very controversial unmasking sort of debate that goes on, having no masks around means that the chronically vulnerable around us are suddenly unable to go out again, and they are still in lockdown. But disabled isn't a bad word. I know a lot of people here might think, oh, that's an unusual sort of vibe to go with. But disabled and being disabled, while it's not necessarily a picnic, it's not a bad thing. What's bad about being disabled is how non-disabled people treat us and how society has been built for us. So for me personally, I was not born disabled. Like 80% of the disabled community, I acquired it. And I went, not necessarily overnight, I had a slow descent into it. But I had never really seen anything about disability. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do about it when it happened to me. And it's, suddenly being thrust into a community you've never heard of. But community is the right word because the disabled community is one of the most wonderful communities to be part of. And I truly believe that disability, for me, has been a gift. And that is because of what it's allowed me to do. I worked in the fashion industry. I spent years trying to pretend that I wasn't disabled. I just used the word chronic sick and hoped that that sort of got me through and allowed me to get the job, because I know if I'd said the word disabled on my CV, I wouldn't have been hired. Fashion industry isn't famous for being kind, definitely isn't kind to people like me. And so, because of my disability, I have been able to channel fashion into something for good. So universal design is the idea of designing products or services or environments where every single person on the planet can take part or use it. Things like drop curbs were invented for wheelchair users, but they are helpful for people with buggies, people carrying heavy luggage, and unloading, between shops and retail. Closed captions were invented for deaf and hard of hearing people, but they also serve a purpose for people whose language might not necessarily be English. And we all use them, on every single TV show you can see closed captions when someone maybe has a really strong accent that we can't understand. And then furthermore, things like Siri and Alexa, they were designed for the disabled community, but we all benefit from it. So what I do with fashion is I allow people to exist in their body universally. Not everyone has to be disabled to wear the clothes that I design, but if you do have access needs, you can be as comfortable. Things like shirts that have an opening down the arm for the 75 million cancer patients that need access to chemotherapy without the indignity of having to get undressed. It also works for diabetics, for people with permanent lines in their arm. I also have trousers designed specifically for wheelchair users where they just have a longer back rise. The excess here and here is removed, and there are various different ways of getting into them. And it is just a case of a couple of extra zips, a little bit of pattern cutting work, and there you go. Suddenly someone can get dressed. And not being able to get dressed is actually a barrier to many people in the disabled community. Imagine not being able to go for a job interview, getting dressed up for your friend's wedding, any social occasion, or even just how you want to dress at home. And the clothes not only hurt you, you don't want to be wearing them anyway. That's the problem that I'm trying to solve. And the fashion industry is taking quite a long time to catch up. I'm the first disabled-owned adaptive fashion brand to ever join the British Fashion Council. Thank you. But that's not good enough. It's 2022. I should not be the first. This should already be happening. This should already exist. One of the first models I worked with hadn't been able to wear a dress for 10 years because of all the access needs that she has. All the dress has is a zip opening. She can access her stoma, her tubes, and her catheter without having to lift her dress up, expose herself. She can just go about her day without having to undress. It's as simple as that. It's not hard. And the challenge of universal design is awesome. It's more fun. We can endlessly design trousers, and we have. But once you add the element of it must work for everybody, it gets far more exciting and really, really interesting. And not a little bit technical, don't get me wrong. But it is really exciting. It's a fascinating area of design. And I'm going to come back and end on, it's 1 in 5 people. It could be any of us at any time. And 1 in 5 people today didn't get to dress up the way they wanted to. Imagine not being able to get out of bed and just easily throw something on. Imagine overnight you can't wear your entire wardrobe because you've been in an accident maybe. And the mental impact. We all know we feel better when we feel like we look good. I made a lot of choice in what I wore today, and I feel okay in it, but these trousers are not my own design, so I'm not super comfortable. But I just want to leave you with, it's exciting, and we should want to involve everybody, because when we design for everybody, everyone can take part, and nobody is left out. And we shouldn't be excluding people. Also, there is a financial incentive. I will finish with that as well. The Purple Pound, which is the spending power of the disabled community, is estimated to be worth £249 billion in the UK and $8 trillion globally. It's not small. It's not a small market. And with everything going on right now, not just for the human impact of universal design, can businesses really afford to exclude us any longer? Thank you for having me here today.